Good morning, good morning, good morning. Barry Jones with SP History. And we are continuing with our series, The Formation of the Deep State. We've worked our way through past the end of the Civil War, the rise of corporations, Ultra Vires, the introduction of imperialism to add territory for the robber barons, the big corporatists, the owners, the power elites, to maximize the profits of their industries. And that, of course, led us into the Spanish-American War, which led us into the World War I, which is now leading us into World War II. And my objective in the next two episodes is to demonstrate how the entry into World War II was similar to the entry into World War I, which was similar to the entry into the Spanish-American War, which is to say that the deep state had an agenda and figured out a way to A, propagandize the American people in all three cases, B, either manufacture or suppress evidence in all three cases, and C, to initiate a false flag event that would so arouse the passion of the American people that they would flip from being isolationist to interventionists and support the war effort. And of course, that was the agenda from the outset. In other words, this is in all three cases treasonous. It's treachery to exploit, take advantage, betray the American people in the private sector in your workforce. It's treason to betray one's country into a war whereby people get killed, American citizens get killed. And so that's the objective of these next two uh, chapters, is to show the linkage and how Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II are not different. We get involved in each one of these wars pretty much the same way. But in order to tell that story for World War II, we need to go over the backstory, the relationship between the United States and Japan, because we all know the precipitating event that got us into World War II was Pearl Harbor, and that means Japan. How did we go from being allies in World War One to being enemies in World War II? What precipitated the change in that relationship? It's not unusual. Think about the end of World War II, we were allies with the Soviets, and then as soon as the ink wasn't even dry, and we were now enemies of the Soviets, that brought about the beginning of a 47-year Cold War and several proxy wars during which. So it's not unusual. After World War One, Japan felt threatened by America's emerging presence in their part of the world, primarily. And of course, this goes back to the Spanish-American War when we got the Philippines and Guam, the former Spanish colonies that now belong to the United States. Of course, we're putting big military bases on all of them. And then also our presence in China, which was predated World War One. One of the reasons why we got into World War One was to protect all our new assets, our new and growing empire. And the primary focus of our attention in China was Manchuria. That's where all the resources were. Well, it just so happens Japan was interested in Manchuria as well, as was Russia, as were a lot of countries. It's where the resources were. And when the United States took the Chinese position, several high-profile cases involving China and Japan, the Japanese felt threatened because in the past, they had been able to go into China willy-nilly and do whatever they wanted. They were the aggressor. China was always on the receiving end of Japanese aggression. But now with the United States protecting China, they can't bully their way around in the Far East anymore. Of course, you remember the story of the Goodwill Tour, the Great White Fleet that Roosevelt sailed around Japan in circles to threaten and intimidate Japan, let them know, hey, anything you do here, is going to be met with U.S. resistance. We are now the big dog in this part of the world. This is our sphere of influence. We're here to protect China. And of course, it wasn't altogether altruistic. We weren't there to protect China. We were there to protect this new trade relationship, the new markets, et cetera, and the access to resources and raw materials, et cetera. So, but, Japan could not maneuver around freely as it had in the past because the United States is there and that bothered them. Put this map here so you can see after the Treaty of Versailles, World War I, Japan was awarded the following German territories. Part of China, which was mostly in Manchuria. As you can see, it's the light orange area there. So it's a strip right through the middle of Manchuria. Russia got the top part of Manchuria, and Japan got the lower part. They also got the Mariana, Marshall, and Carolina Islands. If you look in the bottom right, where the big looks like a fence around, you see the Marshall Islands on the right, you see the Mariana Islands on the top, you see the Carolina Islands pretty much right in the middle of that gated off, fenced off area there. And these new land acquisitions, while a boon to Japan, also presented Japan with some new challenges. And the primary challenge was they're going to need natural resources to support a growing manufacturing industry. These new islands offered very little land on which to grow food to feed all these new people. And so they were going to have a growing manufacturing industry to trade and create an income, a revenue stream that they could buy the food that they need to feed all these new people. And you can see that Japan's population in 1920 was about 55 million. And then in 1940, 20 years later, it's 71 million. So you got 21 million more mouths to feed, but not much land on which to grow this food. So you better hope that the natural resources you're getting out of Manchuria are sufficient to feed this manufacturing industry back home so as to trade and create a trade balance or surplus from which you can buy the food that you need. So they needed industrial exports to finance food imports. That was the trade-off. And that was why Manchuria was so key in this. That's where the resources are. There's no resources to speak of on these islands. So the Japanese tried a couple different approaches to expand its industry. In the 20s, it expanded through free trade and international cooperation. And what they found was a 3.3% economic growth, which was not sufficient to finance the food imports that they needed. And they knew that. In the 30s, they tried a different approach using military force to expand their empire and secure overseas territories and new trade opportunities and investment. And when they measured they juxtaposed the 30s versus the 20s had the 3.3 economic growth. And in the 30s, when they became very militaristic and nationalistic and were on the march everywhere you looked, as you can see by this map, everything that is red is being dominated by Japan in the 30s. So you can see, in addition to the islands in Manchuria, they're expanding further into China. And you can see all these other countries, including the Dutch East Indies and Malaya. And now they're growing at a robust 7.2% economic growth. So it doesn't take a math genius to figure out which approach they're going to pursue. They've tried the peaceful approach. They didn't make any money. They couldn't feed their people. And so when they tried the militaristic approach, they more than doubled their economic growth, and it created a situation whereby they were able to feed their people and meet the needs of their empire. It reminds me of that definition, I mentioned it before, of capitalism. Capitalism is basically, uh, if you have a business, each year it has to grow. That's capitalism. Well, apply that to an empire, and in order to, you're gaining all these mouths to feed, which is great, I suppose, and land, but some of the land is, not all the land is created equal. Some of the land has resources and some doesn't. And to be able to afford the land that doesn't provide resources but has mouths on it to feed, you got to take land that does provide resources so you can feed your industrial engine, make money through trade to feed those mouths. And it kind of reminds me of an NCAA school that has a big football program. And everybody's like, well, all the money, you know, all the money for that athletic program seems to be going into the trough to feed the football program. Well, no kidding, because the football program is paying for the volleyball program, and it is paying for the baseball program, and it's paying for the track and field program, it's paying for the wrestling program, it's paying for girls basketball, it's paying for girls volleyball. I mean, you better feed the beast because the beast is feeding everybody else. So that's sort of what Japan's doing. Japan is feeding the beast by going out with its military, its hammer, and it is taking land and territory that it knows is rich in resources, so it can feed the industrial beasts and feed all these new mouths they got in their empire. So it required a very robust military, is my point. And of course, you can see by looking at that map, a lot of this is islands, or probably 80% of all that territory within that circle is water. So you better have a strong navy, is my point. I showed you in this previous map, you see originally after the Treaty of Versailles, they had a strip of Manchuria that was given to them as a result of the treaty. Now look at this map. You can see they've expanded all over China. And that was on purpose, because the natural resources in Manchuria would feed the overseas market, the industrial engine, which would be able to sustain these overseas trade relationships, these markets, and bring in enough money that they could then use to buy the food that they needed. Now, obviously, this is not going to go over well with the Chinese. They have a desire, as do all people, to be independent, to be sovereign, to be free. And here they are being pushed around by tiny little Japan. And obviously, hostilities are going to result from this. And during these hostilities between China and Japan, the United States, who now has a vested interest in the same part of China that Japan is rooting around in, Manchuria, the United States gets involved and sides with the Chinese nationalists. Now, in the past, whenever they wanted to come into China, they did. And all they had to worry about was the Chinese, or maybe the Russians or somebody, but never the Americans. And here now, the Americans are pushing back. And the way that they're doing it is Japan is a small island nation. Some of the resources necessary to feed this military beast, this industrial engine, is, they have to go outside and purchase those, or take them like they're trying to do in China. And one of these precious resources that they need to feed all this beast, so to speak, is oil. And so what the Americans did is they began to embargo oil and other supplies deemed necessary to make war against China until Japan left China alone. Reminds me of what's going on right now. For 3 years, there's been this war between Russia and Ukraine. And these European countries have begged and browbeat America into helping support Ukraine to fight back against Russia. And their argument is, well, if it's Ukraine today, it could be us tomorrow. And so we, under the Biden administration, set billions and billions of unaccountable cash and some weapons over to Ukraine. Trump gets in power and he finds out that all these same European countries that have been begging for U.S. help to go to Ukraine have simultaneously continued to trade oil, buy oil from Putin and from Russia. And of course, that is oil and natural gas. And those are the two primary resources that Russia sells on the world market that is financing this war in Ukraine. And so Trump just found out about this 2 weeks ago, and he called it out at the UN the other day. He said, I'll sanction Russia when you guys stop buying oil from Russia. On the front end, you guys are buying Russian oil, helping finance this war. And on the back end, we're expected to come in and support Ukraine to fight back. In other words, with your mouth, you say you're supporting Ukraine, but with your dollars, you're supporting Russia. And then you expect us to make the difference. And always, it's always the United States. It's called to come in and fill the gaps, right? And make all the difference. We're the one that take the hit financially. They're not willing to take the hit financially. They continue buying this cheap Russian oil and natural gas, knowing they can't get it anywhere else for that price. So they're not willing to take the hit. They want us to take the hit. And, Trump's just asking what it seems to me a reasonable question. Why would we send our money and our materials, our weapons over to Ukraine to fight back against Russia while you are supporting Russia through purchasing this oil and natural gas and helping Russia finance the very war that we're financing the war against? It doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. Well, the same thing's going on here. We're trying to cut off their oil and their war-making materials, resources, so that they have to go back and play nicely and live within their own borders, their own territories, leave China alone. So we're cutting them off, what we're doing. And obviously this is not going to go over well in Japan. So President Roosevelt understands, quote, the reduction of Japanese offensive power could be achieved chiefly through economic blockade. In other words, we don't have to go to war with them. We just cut them off. They get a lot of their oil from us. We just cut them off. And they don't have enough oil now to go make war against anybody, much less the Chinese. So the Japanese leaders, especially the military leaders, who believe their very survival, they've already done this cost-benefit analysis. They've said, when we work well with others and depend on free trade, we don't make any money. This is the way that we survive. We've got all these new mouths to feed. We have to militarize. We have to go in and invade these countries and take their resources. Otherwise, we don't survive. So they switch directions. They think, well, maybe the Americans are protecting their interest in China. All right, maybe if we look a different direction where America's not at play, we'll be technically in compliance with their requirement to get out of China. And so maybe we can keep getting oil from them. So they turned south, as you can see here, and they went to the Dutch East Indies and to Malaya. And these are areas that other countries, such as Britain, for example, this is their colonial holdings. And they happen to be rich in oil. So it's a 2-for-1. All right, to get America off our back, we'll leave China. But all those resources we're sacrificing by leaving China, we better be able to find them somewhere else. Why don't we go down to the Dutch East Indies or to Malaya? We won't have America to worry about. We'll have Britain. And they've got the strongest navy in the world. But they're not America. And we can get out from underneath this embargo. So the Japanese actually argued that the reason they went into the Dutch East Indies and Malaya was because the United States foreign policy forced them to go that direction. Don't look at us. We're here because America forced our hand. They don't want us in China. They're protecting their own interests there. And so they forced us. They forced our hand. And they sort of tried to play victim in the whole thing. Henry Stimson, who was the Secretary of State in 1932, famously sent a letter. It's called the diplomatic note to Japan, warning Japan, quote, the American government does not intend to recognize any treaty or agreement entered into between those governments, specifically China and Japan, or agents thereof, which may impair the treaty right of the U.S. or its citizens in China, including those which relate to the sovereignty, the independence, or the territory and administrative integrity of the Republic of China. Or, and this is the key part, to the international policy relative to China, commonly known as the open door policy. This is all about protecting our interests. We're cutting off their oil to this embargo because them going into Manchuria threatens our relationship, our new fledgling emerging relationship with China. We don't care about China. We don't care about the Chinese people. It's all window dressing, all this stuff about sovereignty, independence, territorial administrative integrity, blah, blah, blah. It's really about the open door policy. It's protecting our new relationship with China. Of course, we went to China for the same reasons. We wanted markets to trade, raw materials, territory, a military base, and social Darwinism. Now, specifically the first two. We wanted markets and we wanted resources, access. We weren't going to take any of Chinese territory, but we were going to protect it with military bases in the Philippines, which is what we're doing. That's why Japan's upset. And social Darwinism comes into play here because if we don't protect our interests there, we'll sacrifice them to somebody else. That's the whole essence of social Darwinism. Conquer or be conquered, imperialize or be imperialized, target or be targeted. And we've obviously established China as a place we want to do business. That's why we wrote the open door note years earlier, warning all these other nations, okay, we're here now. And we've got a military base in the Philippines to back us up. And no one's going to come in and interfere with this new trade relationship that's emerging between the United States and China, least of all Japan. Oops. 9 years later, Secretary of State Cordell Hull followed up in his own proposal. Now look at the date on this. This is 1941. This is right before December 7th, 1941, which of course we all know is Pearl Harbor Day. Anyway, Cordell Hull, the new Secretary of State, seconded the position by Stimson. And on December 7th, 1941, we finally got a response officially from the Japanese government on the very day that they attacked us. Here you see the picture. These are Japanese diplomats, Nomura and Caruso, with U.S. Secretary of State Hull. And so there's Hull on the far left. And Nomura, the one who wrote this Japanese response, is to Hull's immediate right. They're walking sort of together there. Anyway, the response said, quote, the U.S. position is a stance the Japanese view as obstructing the restoration of normal relations between Japan and China. Normal to Japan meant we win, they lose. Normal means we come in and take what we want from China. That was normal. And you're interrupting that. You're obstructing that. Threatening to the empire's existence itself, disparaging to its honor and prestige, and conspiring with Great Britain and other countries. Remember now, Great Britain was concerned about Malaya and Dutch East Indies, and now you're conspiring with Great Britain and other countries to obstruct Japan's efforts towards the creation of a new order in East Asia. In other words, You're not letting us create the empire that we want. We want Manchuria. We want China. And you're not letting us. So we went to the Dutch East Indies and to Malaya, and now you're conspiring with Great Britain to stop us there. And so here's a letter of response. This is our protest to your position. And in a few minutes, when the attack begins at Pearl Harbor, you're gonna know we're serious. This is, you know, we're not going to stand for this kind of a thing. So December 7th, 1941 is an important day, obviously. From Japan's perspective, industrial expansion was necessary to its survival. They had to generate these growing export markets to finance the food imports that to feed these people, all these new mouths to feed them. All of this growing empire was thrust on it as a result of World War I by the Treaty of Versailles. They're saying, listen, we got mouths to feed, and this is how we're going to do it. And you're preventing us from doing it. And according to the economic data we saw, trying it the peaceful way yielded 3.3% growth. Trying it the military way, the militaristic way, yielded 7.2% growth. So this is the way, you know, it's just numbers. It's simple math. And the Japanese, from their perspective, they're just doing what's necessary to maintain a sovereign, independent, self-sufficient state. And this is life in a Darwinian world. This is how it is. And attempts for the U.S. to curb them doing what's necessary to feed their own people were viewed as threatening to their very existence, as the ambassador put it. So in 1940 of July, we slapped an embargo not just on oil, but on other resources that you'd need to make war against China. It included iron ore, fuel, steel, rubber. And this was the beginning of the U.S. response, basically us saying, it's kind of acting as the guardrails, the United States acting as the guardrails, saying, you've gone far enough. And really, what aroused our ire was when they started messing around in China. And then when they redirected south towards the Dutch East Indies and Malaya, that got Britain's ire up. And of course, our special relationship with Britain, that's our chief ally. They're our chief. We have a special relationship with Britain. So Britain's upset about Japanese expansion in the Pacific. We're going to be upset. And Japan's threatening both of our territorial, not holdings necessarily. We don't hold China, but foreign territories that we're very interested in maintaining a good relationship with. Britain held those territories. But so for the same reason, we're both upset. And so Japan's looking for allies. They by themselves cannot defeat either the United States or Britain, much less the United States and Britain. So in 1940, they signed the Tripartite Pact, whereby they joined Italy and Germany in a military alliance. This is what we came to know as the axispowers. So it's uniting these dictators, these totalitarians together. Where you see cartoonish images of Tojo, Hitler, and Mussolini. And these, at least two of them in particular, are two of the most militaristic nations on earth. You're talking about Italy, or you're talking about Germany and Japan. And of course, Japan has this world-class navy. Germany has this unparalleled land army and a great air force. And then you throw in Benito Mussolini in Italy, and you have three of the most aggressive totalitarian states in the world making trouble for all its neighbors in an alliance working together. So you see where this is headed. Ultimately, Yamamoto, who's the admiral of the Japanese Navy, his whole plan revolved around oil and timing and bargaining. He said, oil is the weak point of our empire's national strength and fighting power. We are now gradually consuming oil that has been stockpiled. As a result of this embargo, we're not adding to our stockpile, we're depleting it. We will be self-sufficient for 2 years at most. This will be less if we carry out larger scale military operations. So the clock is ticking. We got 2 years or less. Our empire will become powerless militarily without oil. Meanwhile, the naval and air force of the United States will improve remarkably as time goes on. You see what he's saying. We better strike while the iron is hot. We got 2 years. The United States is a paper tiger right now, in his view, but it has the potential over time to be a sleeping giant. He said so himself. And somehow we've got to improve our negotiating position with the Americans by striking a blow that is so decisive that its Pacific fleet will be so disabled by this blow that they won't be able to prevent us from doing what we want in the Pacific. And it will force the Americans back to the negotiating table. But this time we'll have the upper hand. Right now they have the upper hand because they control the oil. But if we have military superiority in the Pacific, which threatens their west coast, we have more leverage than we do right now. And so everything we're going to talk about going forward is about the leverage, about getting and maintaining access to oil, about the timing issues. It's very important that Japan decisively defeat the United States quickly. The longer it goes on, the worse it's going to be for Japan. And then about bargaining, coming to the bargaining table with an upper hand rather than without any leverage. That's where we're headed with this. And I just wanted to quick tell the backstory in this particular chapter, this edition, because what happens next is obviously Pearl Harbor. And it's been taught and retaught for years and years and years in American history classrooms that the Americans were caught unawares and that we got pulled into this war because somebody attacked us while we weren't looking. And that the circumstances that forced Japan's hand to even consider attacking America just came out of the blue, that there was no lead up or backstory that contributed to this that predicted what was fixing to happen. In other words, the Americans were just, we didn't start the fight, but we'll finish it. Well, in the next chapter, I want to present with this backstory in mind, now that we know this has been brewing for a long time, ever since the end of World War I, and that we had an interest in that part of the world. It was China. And that Britain had interest in that part of the world, which is Dutch East Indies and Malaya. And that Japan was stepping on everybody's toes. And then when we cut off their oil, there was only one thing they could do. And we knew that. And not only did we know it because that's what we would have done, we knew it for another reason. As a matter of fact, coming out of their own mouths. We could listen to it, hear it, read it. And we'll talk about that in the next session. But this will show again another instance where the deep state, remember, meanwhile, while all this is going on, Britain's getting pounded into submission in Europe by Germany. And we've got all of these companies and their assets tied up in Germany and Italy that are at risk now because of this European war. And Britain's begging us to get involved. But the American people are isolationists. They don't want to get involved. Something has to give. whereby there is some precipitating event that pushes the American people over the edge and gives the politicians the cover, the permission, if you will, to go get involved in another world war. We need, and since Japan is now allied with Germany, if Japan attacks us, our enemy is not just Japan, our enemy is also Germany. And at which point we now have a decision to make. Are we going to focus first on Japan, who attacked us, or are we going to focus first on Germany? Well, where do we have assets at risk? Are they in Japan? Or are they in Germany? And of course, Italy is allied with, and we have assets in Italy as well. So we'll have a decision to make. Are we going to, at which time this precipitating event happens, are we going to focus our energies in the Pacific first, or are we going to focus our energies in Europe first? And that decision tells you why we're so hot to trot to get involved in this World War II, and who's the one pulling the strings behind the scenes to get us into this war. It's these deep staters who have a lot of big assets and business contracts, etc., at risk in Europe, which is the whole reason why Alan Dulles ends up in Europe, to protect all those assets and his clients with Sullivan and Cromwell. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I just wanted to tell the backstory between the United States and Japan. And in the next episode, we'll bring it home and show just how similar our entrance into the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II were, common themes, and to show just whose interests we were really protecting in all three of those wars. And then lastly, to show how treason was committed in all three cases to convince the American people, or to force the American people's hands to get involved in these wars. And that doesn't even include the fact that our deep state has already run the numbers and determined that war is the greatest money-making industry or business model that's ever been invented. So there's all sorts of reasons and motives to want to get involved in this war. And that doesn't even include protecting our interest in China. So anyway, that's it for today. Thank you for joining, and feel free to subscribe to my channel, smash the like button, share this channel, and comment if you feel so inclined. Thank you. God bless.